Welcome everyone to our inaugural Insightful Leader Live event from Kellogg Insight featuring Brenda Ellington Booth. I'm Jess Love, Editor-in-Chief of Kellogg Insight and host of our podcast, The Insightful Leader. Thank you all for giving us an hour of your time today. I also want to thank everyone behind the scenes at Kellogg for making this happen, and I especially want to thank Professor Booth for agreeing to speak with us. This is the first of what will be a monthly series. We have a terrific lineup. Our December event will feature strategy professor Ben Jones, who will be speaking about how to accelerate innovation in the US. Today, of course, we'll be learning about emotional intelligence. But before we dive in, a quick bit of housekeeping. We've just removed the chat function, or we're about to. So if you have any questions, either tech questions for us or questions you'd like Professor Booth to answer, please leave them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen instead. This event will be recorded, and we'll be sending out a link to a video of this presentation after the fact, as well as a few reference materials from Professor Booth. Okay, with that out of the way, Brenda Ellington Booth is a clinical professor of leadership at Kellogg and an extraordinarily popular teacher. She has an MBA from Stanford and a PhD from Kellogg in organization behavior, and she's a professional certified executive coach. Emotional intelligence is always important in leadership. These days, with stress and conflict and division seemingly everywhere, it's hard to imagine moving an organization forward without it. So you are all in for a treat today. Without any further ado, I want to turn this over to Brenda Ellington Booth.
All right, good day, everyone. I was looking at the chat when you were coming in, and you are all over the place, all over the US, Canada, the Caribbean, South America, Brazil, Europe. So welcome, 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 everyone. Thank you so much for being here. All right, I'm going to get started. What to expect? We're going to just talk about the basics of emotional intelligence. And I know some of you may know what it is, and some of you might just know the words. We're just going to get everyone on the same page and start off with some basics, but then really transition to why is it important, especially in our times now of change and uncertainty globally. My hope is just to leave you with some key skills that will help you increase your emotional intelligence so that you can navigate these uncertain times more effectively. I like to have my sessions be very interactive. So we're going to have a poll, and then we're going to do chat, or it should actually say Q&A. So at certain times, I'll invite you to participate. And I just want everyone to have fun with me on this. All right, we're going to start off with a poll. How are you feeling right now? 4 choices: happy, content, settled, curious, ready to go, sad, tired, moving slowly, worried, anxious, cautious, or mad, angry, a little fearful, a little shut down. Those numbers are racking up, I see. Looks like we're at about 80%. All right, we're almost there. Numbers are coming in more slowly. That always happens. We're getting there. We'll give it another 5 seconds, let's put it that way. All right, why don't we just close out the poll? Thank you. So you can see, hopefully, that most of you, the vast majority of you, 60% are in that top category: happier, content, settled, curious, and ready to go, which is great. But there's a few of you, quite a few of you, that are in that second category: sad, tired, or moving slow. And then worried, anxious, cautious, not surprised for that one, given the times. And you still a handful of you in that last category. So thank you so much for sharing how you are doing, let's put it that way. So it's really nice to have you all share that information with us. And I'm going to put up, let's see. All right, here we go. I'm going to put up just another generic slide on how are you feeling. These are not your results, but I just wanted to put this up because it's always helpful for me when I'm in front of people to just get a pulse check in terms of how you all are doing. And in our room right now, most of you are in this top category, happy, content, and settled. I think it was about 60%. But there was definitely, I think 100 and something people were in this tired category. And I think the second category was worried, anxious, and cautious. And then 27 people or so were in this last bucket. So anytime you face a crowd, it could be your staff, it could be a group of people that you're on Zoom with, it's helpful to kind of get a pulse check in terms of where you are. And that actually is one of the key tenets of emotional intelligence, is understanding kind of what you're facing, and not to make the assumption if you're feeling one way that your audience is feeling something the same way, and they could be at very different places. So just kind of put that in the back of your minds right now as we go through the slide today. Now comes the participation part. So emotional intelligence, or EQ, as it's been coined by Daniel Goleman back in the 90s with his seminal book on emotional intelligence. And I guarantee that a lot of you have heard the term, but I just want to understand what your understanding is of the link between EQ and leadership effectiveness. So if you wouldn't, I would invite you all now, or whoever feels like they're wanting to go for this, in the Q&A, what do you think is the link between EQ and leadership effectiveness? And Jess is going to be looking at the responses and giving me some input.
We're getting a lot of highly correlated responses here.
Yes.
Wired to be an effective leader. Maybe it's maybe empathy plays a role.
Great. Well, I think you got the gist of it. There is a strong correlation, and empathy is a big part of it. And particularly in these days, right, with COVID, that's a universal experience, unfortunately, that we're all dealing with. So I'm just going to give you some really basic statistics to talk to you about this notion of leadership effectiveness and EQ, just so you can see what the research says. It's pretty much aligned with what you're saying. So successful leaders, there's literally thousands and thousands and thousands of research articles on what makes an effective leader, and kind of popular things that come up are intelligence, toughness, determination, and vision. But honestly, there was one seminal piece of research that was literally done in the 1950s that has not been disproven, that said really the only two universal characteristics of successful leaders are having intelligence and high energy. And so all of you are on this call, you are smart, and the energy level is up to you. But those were the kind of the universal traits. But even those were necessary, but not sufficient. And it wasn't until Daniel Goleman came around with his research on emotional intelligence that said that, you know what, it's just not being smart. It's just not intelligence. It's more than that. And it's more than just having a high level of energy or their stamina to take on the role of leadership. In fact, if you look at an equations, for those of you that are more mathematically inclined, this is probably the extent of my mathematical abilities at this point, but EQ is far more important than technical skills at all levels of the job. And so what this tells us is you can be the smartest person in the room, but it's not going to have a strong correlation to your success as much as EQ does. Also, as you go up in the organization, EQ becomes even more important. And technical skills, while table stakes are important, EQ becomes even more important. And then lastly, if you look over here at like a star performer and compare them to average performers, these guys over here in the gray, in terms of though if all of these were senior leaders, the one with a high EQ has their attribute for success is significantly higher or 90% of the difference of the difference in terms of being a star performer is associated with having a high level of EQ. So if you have a high level of EQ, if you're in a senior leadership role, then chances are a lot of it is due, 90% of it is due to your level of emotional intelligence. So clearly there's a link, and there's literally now thousands of studies on EQ and leadership and teams and et cetera. But the notion is leadership, success, and EQ go hand in hand. So I'm just going to cover the basics of EQ. It has 4 different components: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. We're going to break these down a little bit. So the top 2 boxes up here are what we call personal competencies. These are things that you do kind of in your head by yourself. But then there's the social competencies, those that require those that involve you interacting with others. So let me just walk through how I like to think about emotional intelligence. I like to keep things simple. Self-awareness is literally about how you're feeling in the moment. So just like we did our polls, many of you are feeling upbeat, but some of you are sad and anxious and worried. It's just that self-check-in. What are you feeling right now? And then it gets a little bit more complicated. So the order can go kind of out of sync depending upon kind of the context that you're in. But a lot of times, sometimes if you notice you're feeling, you might have a choice to make. And sometimes it happens in the absence of people. So I'll give you an example. So earlier this year, unfortunately, I lost a couple of really close family members to COVID. And I was in the middle of teaching and learning Zoom, and it was all of this stress on me and anxiety. And I had to teach that week. And I felt up to teaching, but I just knew my game was off. And I couldn't go anywhere to unfortunately attend any services. So it was a challenging time. So I knew I was feeling sad. I knew I was feeling off. And I chose to tell my students what was going on, as opposed to just trying to kind of barrel through it. And a while ago, I made the decision not to do that when I was off one time. And, students just couldn't understand what was going on. And I promised myself I would always kind of share enough so that if I'm not on my A game, at least I give them the information in terms of how to make the right attribution in terms of what they're seeing and sensing from me. So being in touch with how you're feeling versus just kind of going through the motions, going through the day can be really helpful. And I got so much empathy and compassion from my students afterwards. It was just really a warm and wonderful time, even though it was amidst a lot of sadness. Then there's going to be times when you might be feeling one thing, but you might be on a Zoom call and look around and you sense the person that you're talking to might be off. Then you have to make a decision, because now you have 2 pieces of data. You might be feeling upbeat, but you notice that person might be looking sad or anxious. And then so given that you're upbeat, maybe you have the ability you might be able to lift that person up or even that team up. And vice versa, it could go the other way. You might notice someone has a lot of energy and you don't. You might want to delegate something to a teammate. Lastly, the relationship management is not only looking around the room, sensing what that other person or the team needs, but it's also sensing what you think. Not only looking around the room is important, but also sensing what they might need is important as well. So it's really kind of checking with yourself. You could be fine, sensing what the other person is, what's going on, doing that temperature check, and then maybe getting that data like we did with the check-in and thinking, okay, what does the team need or what does this person need? And then making that choice, okay? So it's a lot of calculus that goes on in your head, but the important part of this is that you're having an understanding of yourself and an understanding of others as well, and then ultimately deciding what to do with all of that information. So now I'm going to walk through some examples of emotional intelligence and those components. Hopefully the examples will give you some information, and maybe you might see yourself in some of these examples, or at least other people. So I'm going to talk about self-awareness and self-management. So there's a picture in that left-hand corner of a woman crying. So this happened to be a client of mine. She worked with a high frequency trading organization. So think guys manipulating, trying to figure out how to make money in the stock market. The guys, literally, the senior leadership team was about 12, literally men, and they were all really bright. And the culture of the environment was extremely competitive, and everyone was very blunt. However, this woman who was in charge of HR, which didn't help, that wasn't her style. And she also was very new in her role. So she frankly felt insecure. And so a lot of times when she was in team meetings with the leadership team, she felt herself getting very defensive if someone were to kind of call her out on something. And literally she would start to cry. So as her coach, I worked with her. And part of this process was, the self-awareness. She knew that she was crying. She knew she wanted to change, but it was really kind of feeling and understanding what was making her cry. So that trigger, understanding the triggers that was getting to her. So we worked really hard to figure out, okay, she knows, she was able to ascertain what kind of responses would trigger her. And then she had choice in the moment. And that choice could be, we could, develop a script where she knew how to handle certain tough questions, or if she just felt too overwhelmed, her kind of default was just to kind of excuse herself politely before the waterworks started happening. So sometimes it's about just understanding what your triggers are and then making a choice. But many of us don't even know what our triggers are. There's a couple of people in that picture that are yelling as well. I've had clients, both male and female, that had the opposite problem. They didn't cry, they just lost their tempers. And so again, working with them to understand what their triggers were, and then giving them options to do, to self-manage in the moment, because none of these people were showing up in a way that they wanted to in their particular leadership roles. One of my favorite examples is the guy in the red shirt over there. There's the guy frowning. And these are not my clients, of course. They're just pictures off the internet. But this guy, he kind of reminded me of actually one of my clients who was a director of an organization. He was a tall guy. He walked around with a frown on his face all the time. And then when he would have team meetings, he would abruptly stand up and pace and walk around. So you can imagine what his feedback was, right? Intimidating, distant, unapproachable. Really, he was one of the nicest people I've ever met. But what was really going on with him was that he suffered from extreme back pain. So he knew that he was in pain, but he chose not to tell anyone for cultural reasons, for personal reasons, because in his mind, sharing about that pain was to him weakness, and he didn't want weakness or pity from his people. However, people were still seeing something on him, and his behavior, once you understood now, was all kind of, it made sense. So the coaching was, okay, maybe you need to have a different choice given, the feedback and the attributions that people are making in terms of the behavior that you're exhibiting. So all of this determines how you show up, how you're feeling, even when maybe you don't even think you are demonstrating it, may be really obvious to other people. And so having a sense of self-awareness is so important, because particularly as leaders, it has that ripple effect. And that's why there's that picture of the kind of a drop in a pond, because a lot of times people take cues from you. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. I'm going to move into that social awareness category now. So social awareness is now kind of not being self-focused, but other-focused. So you might have a sense of how you're doing, and you might be fine, but then it's reading the room or reading another person and having a sense of what's going on with them. So one day, about 2 years ago, I was at Starbucks, and I noticed this interaction between a law student and a lawyer. It was obvious that they were in law because of the thick briefcases and kind of, just kind of what I was observing. And you can tell it was a student and a mentor kind of a relationship. And the lawyer was trying to espouse all of his wonderful knowledge on the student. However, he would be talking and the student would be listening, and all of a sudden, the phone rang and the lawyer would go and he put up his finger, and it was like, and then he did like that 4 or 5 times. And when someone gets that finger, it kind of says, not the finger, but just kind of the pause finger. It's really about you're not important right now, or this is more important than you. And so by the end of the conversation, the student was like, really? And, so he was not sensing what was going on in that situation. I was working with another client of mine recently, and they were telling me that this woman, when she would get on the phone, she was very, very direct. And people would say, "Woo, that was a tense meeting." So, she wasn't reading the room. She wasn't recognizing that her directness was causing people to almost recoil. And so having the wherewithal to read the room and having the confidence even to say, wait a minute, I'm sensing something here, stopping it, and really adjusting to what you're sensing is really helpful. Just like when you do the check-in, it's like, I know people are all over the place and most of you are upbeat, but I know some of you are maybe in not so good places. And I want to be sensitive to that. So that's this notion of social awareness. Next slide, please. Then the last one is relationship management. Is not only looking at and reading the room and getting a sense of what's going on, but then really kind of almost intuiting or even asking what the team or the other person might need. So as you know, I'm a Kellogg professor and we have these marvelous, bright MBA students. And I was talking to one of my students and he was having a hard time understanding in the club that he was running, why aren't people motivated? And I said, when you're talking, what's your goal? And his answer was, well, I want to be the smartest person in the room. And I go, all right. And so he was all very much self-absorbed and he wasn't really in touch with what was going on. And so as you can see here, people are checked out. And so if you're not reading the room, and if you don't kind of even ask perhaps what people might need or want, you miss vital cues and you lose your effectiveness as a leader. So clearly now you can see in these more social situations where leadership effectiveness is highly correlated and linked to a successful leader. And my definition of a successful leader is someone who has followers, basically people who are willing to follow you. And it has two dimensions, certainly the cognitive part or the intelligence part, but we also talk about the warmth part as well. So there's this mix of warmth and competence that go into really what it means to be an emotionally intelligent leader. You need both. And it's just not about being the smartest person in the room, but how you're making people feel. When they leave a meeting with you, how are they feeling? Do they feel, deflated? Do they feel energized? And a lot of that is you being able to read the room. Next slide, please. I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions before we move on.
Well, there absolutely are. They've been coming fast and furious. I did want to start with a quick reminder. A lot of people have asked whether slides or video will be shared. The answer is yes. We will send everyone the slides and video afterwards, so don't worry about that. In terms of emotional intelligence, several people have asked about gender differences in EQ, either in terms of how it's distributed or maybe how it manifests itself in men and women.
That's a really good question. And to be honest, I'm not 100% up to speed on the research, the most current research on this, but I can say that emotional intelligence, there's that empathy piece of it, being able to read others. And I think this is going to sound horrible, so I just wanted to say, but just particularly people, I'll put the caveat this way, people in my generation, what generation am I? I'm a boomer, okay? So I'm sharing with you my age. Women, for the most part, were socialized to be more kind of empathetic. And it's not necessarily a personality trait per se, but we were socialized that way. And so there is a stronger correlation with emotional intelligence and at least those relationship skills, because women were socialized to kind of be the caregiver. But that said, there are tons of men who are really good with emotional intelligence as well, and kind of across the whole spectrum, in terms of however you identify. It's more has to do with your personality than anything else, than gender, because I think gender goes into kind of how you were socialized and kind of the roles that you might have had. Jess, is there another question?
Yeah, a couple people have also asked, why it is that somehow a lot of people with low IQ still make it pretty high up the organizational hierarchy. And I was wondering if that was something you thought at all about.
Yes, and so it's so there is success, but then there's also politics in an organization, and it also is what about the organization needs. And so a lot of times, if an organization might need someone really smart to run something, because maybe it's a pharmaceutical organization, you want the Nobel Prize laureate in charge of creating a vaccine for COVID, say, okay. But then there are other things that are other dynamics that are going on in organizations as well that are politics. And that's where, emotional intelligence doesn't necessarily capture that. So emotional intelligence, I would say, does have its limitations in terms of predicting just promotions. Okay. So, but there's other things that account for success. So it's promotions, it's financial performance, it's happiness, it's status. So it's all of those things that are encapsulated in terms of what I will call success. So, but I'm very much of a realist, and I know that, life and organizations are not fair, and there's other reasons for why, it's just not a pure meritocracy. But that said, being able to read other people will give you a leg up in terms of understanding others and how to read others, and it will help you understand maybe how to navigate politics better. And maybe that's where the correlation is.
Do we have time for one more right here, or should we move on?
Just one more.
Okay. A lot of people are also asking how you do all of this kind of self-reflection or looking out into other people's motivations when you're behind Zoom.
That's a really good question. Oddly enough, and I've been on Zoom since March of last year, teaching all my classes. So there is a correlation between number of people on Zoom and the ability to read people. So if I'm talking to like 4 or less people, I can pretty much read people. So the nice thing about Zoom is that you do get to see body language and facial expressions, which is nice. But the larger the size gets, it is hard. And so, using that speaker view can be helpful. But I do a lot of coaching over the phone, over Zoom right now, and I can still read people. You can still get a sense of whether someone is angry or tense. You can still, I think the vibe does come through. The challenge, though, is that you don't see the full body, right? And that's limiting. I know some of our students are in person, but they're wearing masks. And actually, if you're wearing a mask and if you're 6 feet apart, it's harder to read what's going on than if you're on Zoom, quite frankly, because you get the whole picture. The hardest part is that if you have a large audience, like now, I know that there's many, many people out there, but I have no idea what you look like. I have no idea if you're looking bored or if you're like totally intense. I just have no clue. So checking in with people, like a quick poll, or a lot of times I'll start my classes with, let's just go around the room and either, put in chat how you're feeling, like you did today in terms of your location. Just getting that feedback is super helpful. So thanks, Jess. Okay, we're going to move on now. So next slide, please. So can emotional intelligence be learned? And this is what I was alluding to earlier when I was talking about the gender differences. It's a combination of nature and nurture, quite honestly. Some people are just who they are, kind of how they, kind of when they are a toddler, just like, some babies are fussy and energetic, and other babies are kind of calm and serene. We kind of have a DNA. And so some of us with the DNA that may have DNA that lends itself to those emotional intelligence skills, and some of us don't. It just is. But then there's also the environment, is in terms of what I was talking about too. Some of us were maybe in an environment where we came up in a maybe loving family where there was lots of empathy. And then some of us may have environments when we grew up that were really different. And so a lot of it is nurture too. And so it's learned behavior. So genetics do play a role. Environments play a role. And next slide, please. However, EQ can be learned. And that's the great news. It just takes a will, let's put it that way. If you understand kind of where you are in the emotional intelligence spectrum, and you know that you might be good at reading people, but sometimes you ignore yourself, or vice versa, having that just baseline understanding can make all the difference in the world. Next slide. So I'll give you an example. I had a student, and I'll call her Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, she was really, really bright. She was a wonderful Kellogg student. However, she was a bit low on the ability to read other people. However, before she came to business school, she worked at a consulting firm where, kind of like that high frequency trading firm I was talking about earlier, she was working in New York, and it was a very much, the smartest person in the room, the loudest person in the room, got all the attention and was respected. On top of it, Elizabeth was raised by a family of lawyers. So she would describe every night at the dinner table being with her mother and father and her siblings, and someone would throw out a topic of the day. And the siblings were really tasked with taking it aside and arguing about that. Oh, now that's nurture, right? So she got into the habit of just being very argumentative, being very opinionated about things, because that's how she was brought up. And then her first job out of school, out of college, kind of fed into that. But when she came to Kellogg, which the culture here is, we have this saying, Kellogg nice, everyone is just really nice and everyone is so supportive. So imagine the feedback that Elizabeth got. Ooh, dominating. She needs to listen to other people. And so she realized that, her ability to be aware, socially aware, and then to kind of read the room and try to anticipate what people need, the relationship management was very much lacking. However, she made it a goal for herself. She was going to every meeting that she went to, take a breath, look around the room, not say anything, and just read the room. And then over time, she was able to get better. Now, under stress, her natural instinct is clearly to go back and be the loudest person in the room. And that's her work in progress, but she was able to make significant changes. And I've worked with people all over the map on these issues. And I can say with confidence, it can be changed, but it takes a lot of dedication to do this, because you are maybe fighting against some instincts that you have, maybe from a personality trait that you have, and or maybe how, that muscle that you've built up over the years because of your environment. Next slide, please. So here is one other example that I thought would be relevant for this group. So I had a client of mine earlier this year. Unfortunately, she had to lay off a lot of people in her organization. She was a VP of this organization. And I started talking to her on our, monthly calls, and she was worried about how to talk to literally the surviving people in the organization. But she started off the call by telling me, she said, Brenda, I'm just feeling really anxious and kind of worried about what's going to happen to the organization, because there's just so much going on. I don't know if we're going to get bought. I don't know if there's more layoffs coming. She said, I personally feel okay, because she felt like she had some marketable skills. But, and her philosophy was, just do the work at hand and do the best that you can, because everything else was out of her control. But then she started thinking, but now what do I tell my survivors, the people who are left at the organization? And she was really worried about them. And, this was one of those moments where I challenged her, okay, how do you feel? And how do you think her team feels? And what might her team need from her? And she knew, because she'd been having conversations with her team individually on different topics, that there was a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, just like she was feeling herself. So she chose in that moment, instead of her first go-to was, Brenda, are there frameworks and things to talk about how I can, motivate my team? Ultimately, she decided that she just needed to be transparent with her team and be real by saying, you know what, I feel uncertain too. I don't know what's going to happen. This is how I'm dealing with it, and I'm here to support you. And man, her team felt so much better with her just kind of naming that elephant in the room versus ignoring it. So that was another example, a great example, I think, of emotional intelligence. Was she was in touch with how she was feeling. My prompt was just to get her to think, how might her team be feeling? And she knew, because she was having these individual conversations with people. So she decided just to tell the truth and to have a conversation about it, but then try to get people focused. And it worked. All right, next slide, please. So these are certainly times of change and uncertainty. There's pictures, we're all going crazy with mask, not mask, etc. Here in the US and even globally, we know that there's all these protests that are going on. People are on edge. And there's that woman up there with her hand to her between her eyes. We all have Zoom fatigue. It is just, there's days when I miss the day because I'm sitting in front of this darn computer all day. So yes, there's time, and we don't know when things are going to get better. There's hope, but there's no kind of, as of yet, we don't know exactly when things are going to change for all of us, kind of no matter where we are in the world. Next slide, please. So now what I like to do is walk through some strategies for each of those categories to help you all with becoming more emotional intelligent. And I will take questions kind of at the end and maybe get some thoughts. And at the very end of all of this, I will have a Q&A session. So it's coming. But I'm just going to walk through some of my favorite strategies that either I use or I've seen other people use successfully. So the first one, really simple, and this is not rocket science. And, I'm not presenting anything that maybe you haven't heard. It's just hopefully presenting it in the context of emotional intelligence in terms of what really works. Is to take a breath. So many times we go and go and go, and literally just taking a breath and getting in touch with yourself is all that you need, just to put that pause in your brain, or counting to 10, just putting some space, or importantly, asking how you're feeling and what do you need. This is one of my favorite ones because I tend to ignore my own feelings a lot. And a lot of times recently I've been getting into the habit of just saying, okay, how am I feeling? And I just can't think of an answer right now. Sometimes it comes like after a few seconds. And then it's like, okay, I think I'm feeling a little stressed, or I think I'm feeling tired. What do I need? And then it allows me maybe to adjust my schedule, or at least helps me put a mindset in to help me show up in the way that I want to, but giving myself the grace by saying, you know what, I'm a little tired today. I'm not going to push this too much. Okay. Because again, all of this leadership stuff, times of uncertainty, if you're having an off day, it's so important just to check in how you feel, because like the guy with the back pain, people are going to pick up on something, and it does come through Zoom. I know meditation is kind of a big thing now, but it's so helpful. I do meditation here and there when I'm feeling really stressed. It's not for everyone, so I'm just giving you lots of ideas to try. Some people are more physically inclined. So one of the things I like to do also, just to get in touch with what's going on with me, is to do a body scan. So I just sit back and kind of start from head to toe and notice where the tension is in my body. And I know for me, a lot of times the tension is in my face, or my shoulders might go up. And this just taking a conscious effort to relax, and then just to get in touch and just to kind of reset myself. Another exercise is tighten your muscles and then relax your muscles. Again, this is all about getting in touch with yourself. A lot of times it's just taking a break. I know I'm really focused and I can go. And one year I was doing that. I had a lot of papers to grade, and I sat in front of my computer for maybe 3-4 hours straight. And I literally had to go to a physical therapist because I started getting some pain in my lower hips because I wasn't moving. And sometimes you just need to get up and stretch. And a lot of times when I'm doing Zoom meetings, it's long for like 90 minutes or something, I have everyone get up and stretch or move. It can be just helpful and rejuvenating. I think someone mentioned earlier about journaling. Journaling is really helpful if you particularly notice that you have an issue that you want to work on, like anger or crying or whatever it is, okay? And understanding your triggers, because journaling can help you understand when are you triggered, and then once you understand when, you can start to think of strategies about what to do to change that. Journaling is not for everyone, though. And so I have students tell me all the time they want to develop a habit of reflection. And I put people into kind of 2 categories, or 3 actually. Some people it just doesn't work. Some people are religious about it and they journal every morning or journal every night. And then there's the sporadic people. I'm in definitely that sporadic camp, where I journal when I might feel confused about something, or if I'm trying to figure out what's going on with me. If I'm not happy about something, journaling helps clear my thoughts. But I am certainly not an everyday person. So you have to figure out what bucket you're in. And some of you may not be in a bucket at all, but you might want to call a friend to help figure out what's going on, or a family member. So I'm going to stop at this point, and I'm going to invite you all, when you think about self-awareness strategies, that is ways to get in touch with who you are. Do you all have any other ideas that you can add to our knowledge? And I would invite you to put that into the Q&A.
I will read some of these tips as they come in, if that sounds good.
Sounds wonderful.
Earlier in the presentation, someone mentioned, I think it's important to be using the gallery view just so you can see everyone in the call and just literally watch their faces. One strategy we use in our organization is to rely on others to help each other when we're having a moment of anxiety. And we ask the person, is this a 911 or a 411? Essentially, bring them back down and say, is this truly an emergency, or do we just need more information?
Ooh, that's really good.
I like that one. I'm also reading Reflect on what an admired mentor or guide that you try to emulate might do in that particular situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great suggestions. Basically the notion is to get in touch with what's going on with yourself, and anything you can do in that vein will get you to that self-awareness part. Because if you're not self-aware, you have a blind spot, but you still are, if you're interacting with people, then people are picking up on something. So it's so important to be in touch with kind of where you are. And even for health reasons as well, too. That's where a lot of our stress comes from, because we just go, and we don't think about how are we feeling. And sometimes we really literally need a break for our own mental health, particularly in these times of stress and uncertainty.
I think you're going to like this one too.
Yeah.
A good acronym is HALT. Ask yourself, am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired?
Ooh, I love that. HALT. Hungry, angry, what was it?
Lonely or tired?
Lonely or tired. Yes. And then asking yourself, what do I need? And so many times so I think the first part is the HALT part, but then making sure that you ask, what do you need right now? If you're hungry, take a break, get something to eat. If you're tired, do something to rejuvenate yourself if you can. That's a wonderful one. I'm going to steal that one.
Okay. Oh, these are great. We'll get you a copy of this recording as well.
Yes, thank you. All right, Jess. We're going to move on to our next slide, please. All right. So now we're going to move into self-management strategies. So this is about, given how you feel, or maybe given what you're perceiving, what others might need, what do you need to do? What choices do you need to make? Sometimes it's just setting an intention before a meeting. So many of you, I know, myself included, we have back-to-back meetings and back-to-back Zoom meetings. And a lot of times, and if a meeting goes over, then your mind is in the previous meeting, but we're human beings. And so setting an intention before a meeting, and you can do this at the beginning of the day. I had one client that literally would start her day with thinking about an intention for every meeting. So she was ready because she had back-to-back meetings. Or if you have a few minutes before a meeting, setting an intention, like what do you want to get out of this meeting? Or how do you want to show up for this meeting? How do you want to be perceived? And if you are feeling a little bit off or antsy, then there's going to be a mismatch between how you feel and how you want to. And so you might need to do something to shift your own energy or to help you focus. Take a break. That's kind of what I said also, is sometimes, go, you just need to take a 5-minute break. If you're doing, sending an email, and if you're, just trying to get things done, sometimes a pause before you hit the send button is very helpful. I'm sure that's not new news to anyone, but there's so many times when I'm just wanting to get things done and I say, you know what, I'm not ready to send this email yet. And sometimes I might sleep on it. Or if I have a decision to make, sleep on it. I had a mentor when I was getting my PhD. He studied decision making, and he gave me some of the best advice I ever got. He said, sometimes a decision is not to make a decision. And that was kind of freeing. So many times we feel pressure to make decisions, but sometimes we don't have to make a decision right now unless it's a real emergency. And sometimes the better decisions I made were when I said, you know what, the stakes are too high. I'm going to delay and not make a decision and sleep on it. And particularly when you're angry. So that goes back to emotional intelligence, right? If you are feeling angry or frustrated, please don't hit the send button, because you might have you might have to clean up something that you didn't intend, particularly if you give yourself some time and space, really thinking about your audience. Rescheduling a meeting. That time period when I was talking about when I lost my family members, I looked at my calendar and it's like, okay, what do I have to do and what's optional? And I went through and rescheduled a bunch of meetings just because I knew I didn't have the capacity to handle that. And that's helpful. And also giving the grace to other people to do that as well. And understand what makes you feel emotionally recharged. It's different for different people. Introverts, go into your corner, read a book, meditate. I'm a big introvert, so I need that quiet time. Those of you that are more extroverted, get on the phone, get on Zoom, talk to someone, take a socially distant walk or whatever. Take a mental health moment, a mental health half day or day or longer if necessary. These are times of extreme stress. And so being emotionally recharged is helpful, because what happens when you're emotionally depleted? You don't make good decisions and you don't show up in the way that can be helpful to people that are depending on you. And that's why there's that picture of the oxygen mask. You really do have to take care of yourself, particularly if you're responsible for other people. You don't, because there's so much research that shows when we are under stress, our natural tendencies come out. And a lot of times our natural tendencies aren't the best tendencies to have in a particular situation. And that leads to people saying, oh, you must have low IQ, right? Because you literally don't have the capacity to read yourself or read the room and be there for other people. One of my favorite things that I tell people is to create your own personal board of directors or trusted friends and colleagues. I know I would not know what to do without a circle of friends inside of work and outside of work, that I know that they're there, that I could trust them with my life, literally, and that when I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed, I could reach out to them. I think that was one of the suggestions that someone had, with that Jess talked about. But having, a deliberate group of people that are safe for you to go to, and it could be family members, it could be friends, it could be colleagues, but just someone that you trust, that you can vent to when you're about to lose it. And it's better to do it then, and they could literally kind of talk you down before you make that decision or say something that you're going to regret. And then the other thing is, when you are feeling upbeat, spread your joy, send an acknowledgement. That is, if you think of, someone makes you smile, let them know that person made you smile. There's a lot of research showing that people feel underappreciated at work. And because we have little bubbles over our head that sometimes we might think something, but we never speak it. If you are in a good mood, you might make someone's day as well. So making the choice, if you're feeling good, is there someone that you can acknowledge? One of my favorite stories is about the former CEO of Campbell's Soup Company. His name is Doug Conant. He literally would, at the end of every day, would write thank you notes to his employees that, he wanted to acknowledge. I met him a few years ago. He told this wonderful story to our MBA students where he said he had gotten into a horrible car accident. He was lucky to be alive. And then when he was in the hospital, it was kind of pay it back. He got literally thousands of notes from good well wishes from his team and from the employees of his organization. But that was his habit of just acknowledging people. If you're in the space to do it, it can have a huge motivational impact on those that you work with. I'm going to stop there and see, in terms of self-management strategies, that is understanding how you feel and those choices that you make. What are your thoughts on that? Jess?
Yeah, we've had a few other ideas come up. Using humor as a tool to lighten the mood.
Mm-hmm. Let me put a pause on that one, Jess. So
Right.
humor can be really good because laughter is a big antidote for feeling depressed. However, big caution, you really want to read the room, because if someone just lost someone and if you're like telling jokes, it may not go over well. So you have to be really sensitive to that. So humor is great, but use it judiciously.
A couple of people have mentioned gratitude or focusing on things that are working fairly well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And along those lines, just being helpful. So even a small act like returning a grocery cart at a store parking lot for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, a lot of people talking about just time, ways to get time and space from a situation. So
Yes.
running, walking, coloring books, painting, music. I feel like I'm like learning a bunch of verbs.
All right. No, all those things to take a break, really think about what recharges you. It's different for different people. And some people literally get recharged by acts of kindness. There's something about doing something nice for someone that can recharge you. Having a gratitude journal, that's kind of a popular thing as well. Thinking about, if you need emotional recharging, thinking about what's going right. And sometimes things are horrible, but usually not everything is going horribly all the time, and we just don't take the time to smell the roses per se. But then just that notion of taking a break and knowing what recharges you. I was working with a client of mine. She did have a coloring book, and that was helpful for her. For me, it's more of taking a walk. For me, getting outside is wonderful. And, I live in Chicago, so, I'm not looking forward to our sub-zero weather that's coming up, but we've had some gorgeous weather. And even if I can get outside for even 20 minutes, that just changes my mood. So taking that break, putting a pause before you act. The notion here is to respond versus react, because when you react, that's that knee-jerk reaction, and that's when you can have regrets. But if you take a moment, pause, and respond, you hopefully can respond in a way that's coming from a place of how you want to show up, or whatever your goals are for your team or your organization. All right, let's go to the last slide here. All right, so I've grouped together social awareness and relationship management strategies. This is checking in with others. All right, so sometimes it's just asking, how are you doing? And mean it. In the US, we always ask, how are you? And our phrase is, oh, fine. And in other cultures, when they hear, how are you doing? It starts up a conversation. And so for us to really ask with the intention of really, truly understanding how is someone doing can be really helpful. And you also have to be in the space to receive it, because it's, sometimes you might not be ready to receive it, but if you're in the space to receive it, then, ask and mean it. Read the person, read the room, and determine how to respond. This is what I've been talking about, kind of the whole thing. I sense you are frustrated. Is that true? Check in with people. Because again, even if we were in person, we might get a vibe from someone. It's a little bit harder over Zoom, but if you sense something is wrong, I sense something is off. Is that true? Checking in. And then, that's all you can do. You can't control what other people, how people will take that. They might be defensive. Oh no, nothing's wrong, but you can tell. But at least you've made the gesture. Or asking, what do you need from me right now, is helpful. That kind of 911, 411 was very a good strategy there. And then really listen. I teach a whole class on leader as coach to my MBA students, and everyone listens all the time, but the quality of listening, quite frankly, is not that good. A lot of times we listen to respond versus listen to really hear what someone else has to say. Then the other thing is, if you're running meetings, create some norms to check in with others. A one-word check-in. This is what I do with one of my classes all the time. It's a smaller class, and literally there's about 16 of us, and we go around the gallery, and everyone has to say a word that they're feeling. Or if it's a larger room, pulse checks like we did earlier. And then this is another thing. At the end of a meeting, it's something I'll call plus delta. That is doing a process check with people, particularly now that we're in Zoom. It gives you kind of an excuse to say, how's this working? I mean, we've been at Zoom for a while, but, having what worked well in that meeting? Is there anything that we should do differently to maybe make people feel more energized, so that they can feel more engaged and get that real-time feedback is so helpful. So having those norms can be very important. The last one I have is solicit useful feedback. And that is, this is about you in relationship to others. And it could be something like, I've been really working on my listening skills. How am I doing at that? That could be a personal goal that you have. But just asking for generic feedback, it's really hard for people to respond. How am I doing? Great is going to be the answer. But really getting people to respond to something and getting that useful feedback that's behavior based. I'm working on trying to speak up more in meetings. In the last meeting, how did I do? Now people can help you figure out how well you're doing on these relationship skills. With that, Jessica, do we have time maybe for one or two comments before I'm going to wrap up?
I'd love
questions. Yeah,
we've gotten so many great questions. I'd love to get you a couple of those before we have to break.
Yeah.
So many people have asked, is there a threshold after which EQ starts to actually make you a less effective leader? How much sharing or empathy is too much? Will it start to lead to too many missed deadlines? Can empathy get out of control?
Yes, that's a really great question. And yes, the answer is yes. And so it's that balance of you have to have a boundary as a leader, as a manager. And so you want to be empathetic, but you don't want to become someone's therapist. And so it's that delicate balance of, showing that you care, but then maybe saying, what, I might, let me give you some resources where you can handle that. And it's really hard these days because people have so many issues on their plate, and it really is about having a dialogue with someone, but also using your judgment as well, because some people might be frankly using this as an opportunity to maybe get out of work or to hide the fact that they're not a good performer. So you really have to use your judgment. And that's where that trusted board of advisors really comes in handy to help you make sense of things, because it's hard. These are hard times. But I would say, definitely err on the side of showing some compassion and grace, particularly if someone, lost a family member or, they're having a hardship. But at the same time, my favorite thing to do is I hear you, I understand. But if it's a pattern of behavior over time, then maybe it's a conversation about, okay, it looks like your situation isn't going to change soon. Let's talk about what we can do so that, the team isn't hurt by this. And also, I want to be respectful of you. So it's really understanding that delicate balance of showing empathy, because showing no empathy won't get you any brownie points, but showing too empathy, then you become the staff therapist, and that's not your job either. And so there's got to be that middle ground where you show enough that you care, but then always keeping in mind, what does the team need? Because usually if you're thinking about what does the team need or what does the organization need, it kind of steps you out of that interpersonal reaction. And my go-to is always, I have to think about the greater good. So even like if I have a student in my class that has a special request, and it's like if it's a one-off, fine. But if it's going to impact the entire class, then I have to make a call for that's best for the entire class, and I explain my rationale for the entire class. So the same would be true in a leadership role. And this is what I tell my leaders all the time that I coach. Think about what's the greater good. By being too empathetic can be hurtful. So I think that we are about out of time. So Jess, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I know. Oh, there are so many more good questions. We'll have to have you back at some point.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, everyone who attended our inaugural event. Thank you especially to Professor Booth. As a reminder, we will be sending out a link to a video of this presentation to everyone who registered for this, as well as a few reference materials from the professor. Also, if you opted to subscribe to Kellogg Insight when you registered for this event, we'll be adding you to our mailing list in the coming week. If you didn't but want to hear from us, be sure to head over to Kellogg Insight and subscribe. Finally, Don't forget about next month's discussion with Professor Ben Jones on accelerating innovation in the US. That webinar will be on Thursday, December 17th at noon, and we really, really hope to see you back. Thanks so much. Enjoy your weekend.